Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to support the channel by helping us reach 10,000 subscribers. Let's start. The grand ballroom at the Mills Mansion sparkled with pretty lights. Big crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, shining brightly. Expensive paintings hung on the walls. They were worth millions of dollars and showed that Grayson Mills was very rich and liked fancy things. Grayson Mills stood in the middle of the room. He was a tall man in his 50s, wearing a black tuxedo that cost more than what many people earn in a whole month. He was showing off his new art pieces to his rich and powerful guests. His voice was loud and smooth. "This painting," he said, pointing to a strange picture full of colors, was bought at a special auction in Monaco. Only 3 people in the whole world were allowed to buy it. He smiled as his guests nodded and smiled back, impressed. Among the busy workers dressed in black and white, a woman named Alara Clark moved through the crowd. She was carrying a silver tray with glasses of champagne. Alara didn't wear a server's uniform. Instead, she wore a simple but beautiful black dress. She was actually invited to the party, but the way Grayson invited her felt like a mean joke. She was usually the head of the house staff. The other workers looked at her with surprise. Something felt different tonight, but they didn't know what. Alara kept a calm face, even when she heard mean things being said. By the big fireplace, Grayson was talking with a group of rich men, CEOs, bank bosses, and people who had old family money. They laughed loudly. Alara walked by and heard Grayson say something that made her stomach twist. "I thought it would be funny," he said, holding his fancy drink, "to let one of the workers join us tonight. You should see her face when she looks at the art, like a child in a candy store. She could never afford any of this." His friends laughed. Their laughter was sharp and full of pride. Alara's hand held the tray tighter, but she kept walking. She had been ready for something like this. As she walked toward the kitchen, she saw herself in a mirror on the wall. Her mother's words came back to her. "Stand tall, baby girl. Your dignity isn't theirs to take." In the quiet kitchen, Alara took a deep breath. She thought about her family. Her grandma had worked as a maid in the South when things were unfair. Her mother worked hard and went to school at night while raising 3 children. Alara had finished college and had a degree. She was smart and strong, even if some people only saw her as a servant. The kitchen was full of busy workers making more snacks. Alara checked her phone and smiled. A message had come from Sienna Lee, and it said, "On my way. Let's show them what real class looks like." Alara felt her confidence grow. She fixed her dress, checked her makeup, and took another deep breath. The night had just started. Grayson had no idea what he had begun with his silly invitation. Alara had worked in the mansion for years. She had watched and learned about these people. Tonight, she was not just watching. She was going to be part of something big. As she walked back to the ballroom, Alara's mind was clear. She had heard Grayson's cruel words, seen their rude smiles, and felt their cold stares. But those things didn't break her. They made her stronger. The party was just starting, and soon everyone would see that they had made a big mistake by looking down on her. Then, something happened. The room changed when Sienna Lee walked in. Sienna didn't come late, like others, to look fancy. She came right on time, and it felt like she planned it that way. She wore a beautiful deep blue suit that made her look powerful. Sienna was 52 and had built her own tech company. Everything about her showed strength and confidence. People turned to look at her. They knew who she was, Sienna Lee, CEO of Innovatech, a company famous for building smart AI tools. Her name had even been in Forbes magazine. When she came to a party, it became a big deal. Many guests started trying to get close to her. Grayson saw her too. He stopped talking when he noticed Sienna walking in. She was not part of his plan. He watched her closely. Sienna looked around the room and then smiled when she saw Alara. A quiet message passed between the 2 women. They knew what they were doing. Some guests whispered, "Did you know Sienna Lee knows one of the staff here?" Their eyes widened. Grayson looked worried. Sienna walked through the crowd. She didn't stop for long chats. She was clearly heading somewhere. She went straight to Alara and gave her a warm hug. Nearby guests stopped talking and stared. "Alara, dear," Sienna said in a friendly voice, loud enough for people to hear, "thank you for the invitation. I wouldn't have missed this for the world." Her words made it clear. Alara had invited her. Alara wasn't just a guest. She had power. Grayson rushed over, trying to smile. "Sienna, what a surprise. I didn't know you knew my—" He stopped and carefully said, "my household manager." Sienna kept smiling, but added a little edge to her voice. "Oh, Alara and I go way back. She's helped my company with our diversity and inclusion programs. Her ideas have been so helpful." Then she looked at the nearby guests and said, "Did you know Alara has a master's degree in organizational psychology?" The room went quiet. People were shocked. Alara stayed calm but stood tall. Some guests who had ignored her before now looked at her with new eyes. Later, Alara and Sienna stood near some important board members. They talked about company culture and how to treat workers better. Alara spoke smartly, and Sienna backed up her ideas with real-life examples. Grayson watched from the other side of the room. He saw his party changing. The people who usually stayed close to him were now listening to Alara and Sienna. One of Grayson's rich friends, the boss of a big bank, was talking seriously to Alara. Another woman who had laughed at Grayson's mean joke earlier was now listening to Sienna's story about why it's important to have different kinds of leaders. The power had changed. Before, Grayson had all the attention. Now Alara and Sienna were in charge of the room. They were talking about real things, while Grayson's side of the room felt boring and fake. Sienna looked at Alara and gave her a small nod. Their plan was working, and they weren't finished yet. Now, Alara began to tell her life story. People in the room grew quiet to listen. "My mom worked 3 jobs," Alara said. "She cleaned houses, worked in a hospital, and still went to nursing school on weekends. She showed me what hard work looks like." People listened closely. Some looked a little uncomfortable in their fancy clothes. One of Grayson's close friends, that Colton Morrison, was in the group. He ran a big investment company. Earlier, he had laughed at Grayson's joke. Now he looked thoughtful. He kept glancing at the mirrors, maybe seeing himself in a new way. Alara went on. "When I was 12, my mom fainted. She had worked 36 hours straight. The hospital helped her and later gave her a better job. They saw her studying during breaks. They saw her potential." There was silence. Then Colton Morrison cleared his throat. "In 20 years of running my company," he said, "I've never thought about giving our support staff a chance at management jobs." He turned to Grayson and asked, "How many of your workers have college degrees?" Grayson looked red in the face. I don't really ask." Alara answered calmly, 3 have master's degrees. 2 are getting their bachelor's, and 1 is a certified public accountant who couldn't find a job in his field because of certain barriers." Sienna stepped in again. "When I started my company," she said, "I was often the only woman in the room and the only person of color. People made many wrong guesses about me." A woman asked, "Did you face discrimination?" Sienna smiled gently. "It's not always direct. Sometimes it's in how people cut you off when speaking, or in the way they act surprised when you succeed. It's in invitations that come with hidden insults." Her eyes met Grayson's. Colton Morrison spoke again. "My company talks about diversity every year, but what are we really doing about it?" People in the group looked around, thinking. Grayson tried to talk, but more people were joining the conversation. They were excited because the talk felt real and honest. A very important lady, who helped run some of the biggest companies in the world, raised her hand a little and said, "Sienna, can you help my companies make real changes for diversity, not just pretend ones?" Before Sienna could answer, 3 other business leaders asked the same thing. Alara looked around. Earlier that day, many of these people had ignored her. Now they wanted to show they cared. She thought it was a little funny, but she could also tell they were truly starting to understand. Grayson stood alone. His friends were now talking seriously about fairness and treating people better. Nobody was listening to his usual stories about buying new things or making big deals. The room was changing. Alara and Sienna looked at each other. They knew this was only the beginning. Grayson's world was going to change even more soon. As more people talked about being fair and kind at work, Grayson tried to take back the spotlight. He said loudly, "Everyone, I want to show you my new art piece." But only a few people turned to look at him. Nova Chen, a smart reporter from a big newspaper, had been quietly watching everything from a corner. Her notebook was full, and she was typing fast on her phone. She didn't expect this story. It was much bigger than a fancy party. She asked a big company boss, "Mr. Morrison, did tonight change how you think about hiring people?" He stood up straight and answered, "I learned that one of my friend's workers is better than some of my top managers. This really opened my eyes." Grayson tried again. "Let's talk about my new charity," he said, but he was ignored again. Another boss spoke up. "We changed how we hire people and made 30% more money. We looked new places and found amazing people." Nova wrote even faster. This wasn't just a party anymore. It was now a big moment where rich and powerful people realized they had been missing out on great talent and fairness. Alara saw this change and decided to speak too. She stepped forward. Now, everyone looked at her like they would a guest, not a server. She pointed to the study room. "I've watched many meetings in there," she said. "Deals were made, but only between people who already knew each other, not the best people. Just the most connected." The room went quiet. Nova walked closer. "Miss Clark, do you think this happens a lot?" she asked. Before Alara could reply, another woman, who owned a tech company, spoke up. "Last year, someone told me to get a white man to help me get money for my business. I said no. It took longer, but I stayed true to myself." Grayson's face turned pale. His plan had completely backfired. Nova wrote down everything. This would be on the front page, not just a little story about a fancy party. Sienna smiled and said, "What matters is what happens after tonight. Will this talk lead to real change?" Some leaders gave Alara and Sienna their business cards, saying they wanted to work with them. The important conversations Grayson had wanted to control were now happening without him, and they were about the things he had tried to ignore. Nova was ready with her story title, "Big Party Becomes Start of Real Change." And the small line below it would read, "One man's mean plan becomes a lesson on fairness and respect." The fancy party had turned into something much more. Then something amazing happened. Alara gently placed her tray on a table. It made a soft clinking sound. Everyone looked. She walked to the center of the room. She stood tall and strong. "If I may," she said. Her voice was clear and steady. The room became very still. Not just quiet, but truly still. "For 6 years, I've worked in this house," she said. "I've served your drinks and planned your parties. I've listened to your talks about changing the world, but you never looked at me." Grayson tried to stop her, but Mr. Morrison gently held his arm and said, "Let her speak." Alara looked around the room. "Tonight I was invited as a guest, but only as a joke. Mr. Mills wanted to see me struggle in your world, but what he didn't know is I've already been in this world for a long time, just in a different way." Many people felt uncomfortable. They knew what she meant. Nova kept writing, knowing this was a very special moment. Alara continued, "Many of you say you want diversity at work, but in your homes and offices, you miss the people right in front of you." She pointed to a young man carrying drinks. "That's Miles. He's an accountant and speaks 3 languages. She pointed to a woman. "That's Maria. She's getting her master's degree in international business." Each time Alara shared something like that, the room seemed to shake with surprise. Grayson turned red. then pale. His plan to embarrass Alara had now become a big lesson about hidden talent and missed chances. Alara's voice grew stronger. Dignity doesn't come from your job title or money. It's not about your art or your car. It's something everyone has. And if you try to take it from others, you only show how little you have. Some people started crying. A tech company boss was nodding and typing notes on his phone. The power in the room had changed. Grayson moved toward the edge of the room. He wasn't the center anymore. Alara said, "I'm not special. There are many people like me. The question is not if we are ready for your world. The question is, are you ready for us?" The clapping started slowly. Then more joined. Soon the whole room was cheering. It wasn't polite clapping. It was real, deep applause for someone telling the truth. Grayson watched. These were the same people who laughed at his jokes earlier. Now they were cheering for Alara. Sienna stood beside Alara. Together they showed that success and respect don't depend on being rich or powerful. They showed a new kind of strength. After Alara's speech, everything changed. Guests didn't stay in their usual groups. They walked around and talked to people they had never noticed before. Vivienne Chen, a big boss at a medicine company, walked up to Maria. "I'd love your ideas about Southeast Asia," she said, giving her a card. Miles, the drink server, was now showing his financial ideas to 3 money experts. He wasn't holding a tray anymore. He was holding a pen and drawing on a napkin. Nova, the reporter, kept watching. "This is amazing," she said to Sienna. "I've never seen anything like it." "That's because most events are fake," Sienna replied. "This is real. You can't ignore it." Grayson stood near his expensive painting while feeling left out. His closest friends were now happily talking to his workers. One touching moment happened when an old board member went up to Alara. "My granddaughter tried to tell me all this," he said with teary eyes. "I didn't listen. But tonight, I see it clearly. Will you speak at our next board meeting?" All around the room, more people had similar moments. The wall between bosses and workers wasn't just broken, it had vanished. And everyone could see how silly that wall had been. The agreement to keep things the same was gone. People were walking around the big party, talking in little groups. Nova watched them closely. At first, the talk was light and simple, like, "How's the weather?" or "Nice dress." But then it started to change. People were now talking about important things, like being fair at work, hiring people from different backgrounds, and making the workplace better for everyone. Nova was writing everything down in her notebook. Someone said, "We need to change how we hire people." Another person added, "I never thought about hiring people from our own staff. They might have great talent we're missing." The workers, who were shy at first, started to speak up. They talked about their hopes, their dreams, and their talents. Every time someone spoke, it was like a tiny crack in the wall that kept people in their place. Grayson, the man who planned this party to embarrass Alara, had built that wall. But now it was breaking. Colton Morrison, a big boss, had been thinking all night. He gathered some other bosses and said, "We should make a group to find and help talented people who didn't go to fancy schools or don't have perfect resumes. Who wants to join me?" Lots of hands went up. People were ready to help. They made plans and wrote down jobs to do. What Grayson wanted to be an embarrassing moment was now becoming something amazing, real change. Alara and her friend Sienna walked through the crowd. They introduced people, helped them talk, and made sure the ideas turned into action. They were like bridge builders, connecting everyone together. The party was turning into something special. Grayson didn't like it. He tried to stop it by saying dinner was ready or turning on music. He even talked about his art collection, but no one listened. The party had changed and Grayson could no longer control it. Nova, the reporter, kept writing. She knew now this wasn't just a party story. She was watching something big happen right in front of her. Then something surprising happened. Preston Sterling, Grayson's oldest friend and a big boss of a bank, stood up. His face was red, not from wine, but from strong feelings. "Grayson," he said loudly, "we need to talk about how you hire people." Everyone went quiet. Preston was known for being serious and honest, but he had never spoken like this before. "For 20 years," Preston said, "you only hired people who were just like you. You called it culture fit. But tonight made me realize that culture isn't right." Grayson tried to laugh it off. "Maybe this isn't the right time," he said. Preston shook his head. "It's the perfect time," he said. "I've been on your company's board for 15 years. In all that time, we didn't have one single plan to include people from different backgrounds unless the law forced us. We've turned away so many good people because they didn't fit. That has to stop." The room was tense. Alara and Sienna looked at each other. Preston was helping them faster than they had expected, but they were ready. Preston kept talking. "Our next meeting is soon. I want a full change in how we hire and promote people." 3 more board members stood by him and nodded. Grayson looked shocked. "You can't do that," he said. One board member said, "We can, and we will. The world is changing. We must change too, or be left behind." Alara stepped forward. "I have something," she said, taking a paper from her bag. "It's a full plan to help talented people who don't usually get noticed. It includes mentors, classes, and clear steps to grow in the company." Everyone gathered around her. They listened closely and read her paper. Grayson had wanted to embarrass her, but now she was the most respected person in the Sienna room. Sienna added, "My company will join too. We've done this before and money and had better ideas." Now, the room felt alive. People weren't just talking, they were ready to act. Boss after boss stepped up, saying they'd help too. Nova watched as Grayson's power faded. The people who used to agree with him were now on Alara's side. One boss said, "We need real numbers to track progress." Another said, "There must be real consequences if we don't meet our goals." More people gathered around Alara's plan. Even the serving staff joined in, sharing their ideas. They had thoughts too, great ones. Grayson tried one last time. "This is my house," he shouted. "This is my party." But his voice wasn't strong anymore. Preston Sterling spoke again. "It stopped being your party the moment you tried to hurt someone who's clearly better for business than you." The room was silent. That moment was like a lightning bolt. Alara stood tall. She had dreamed of this, but it was happening even bigger than she hoped. What started as quiet resistance had turned into a powerful movement. Grayson looked desperate. He went to the middle of the room again. "This is silly," he shouted. "You're all being fooled by a servant who got lucky with one speech." Everyone went quiet again. The word servant hit hard. Some guests stepped away from Grayson like they didn't want to be near him. Sienna stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Alara has a master's degree from Columbia University. She's written research on how companies work best. She's not a servant, you just see her that way." Colton Morrison spoke next. "I just checked my company's hiring. We've said no to over 300 smart people just because they didn't come from the right places. That ends tonight." Others joined in. Executives said they were ready to change. The movement was alive. One investor said, "We're all guilty. We've gone to parties like this and ignored the people serving us. We never saw their real worth." Nova typed fast. This wasn't just a story. It was history. Grayson tried to walk through the crowd, but no one made space for him. People turned away. Alara saw him alone and felt many emotions. This wasn't about hurting him. It was about making things better. Someone called out, "Your art is nice, Grayson, but you've treated people like decorations too long." That started a whole new wave of talk about how people should be seen and heard, not just used. Grayson tried one more time. "All of this sounds nice," he said, trying to smile, "but business is business." A CFO spoke up. "Do you even know what different voices bring to business? New ideas, better problem solving, understanding more people? We've been hurting our companies by hiring only one kind of person." The party had fully changed. The flowers and fancy things now felt unimportant. What mattered were the true talks between people from all walks of life. Alara looked at Sienna. They both knew. They had done it. Grayson was not just losing friends. He was losing his place in the business world. He tried to show off, but now everyone saw he didn't have real strength, only old habits. As he stood near the big stairs, looking lost, people started putting on coats, but they weren't just going home. They were leaving with real plans and new hope. August Bennett, another old friend of Grayson's, walked up to him. "Grayson," he said gently, "we've known each other a long time, but tonight I realized I've laughed too many times at your jokes about the staff. I've helped you keep this unfair system." Grayson tried to speak, but August held up his hand and said, "Let me finish. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling a very important meeting at Bennett Global. We need to talk about how we treat people in our company. And Grayson, I think you need to do the same." That sentence hung in the air like a big truth. Grayson's face got tight and angry. "You're telling me how to run things in my own house?" he asked. August said, "Your house? You invited a smart, kind woman to this party just to embarrass her. Think about that, Grayson. What does that say about the way you lead?" All around them, the other guests were in small groups talking about ways to do better. Alara and Sienna were in the middle of many of these talks. People were listening to them now, giving them the respect they always deserved. Grayson watched as an old friend of his started walking toward him, then suddenly turned and went to talk to Alara instead. Grayson was starting to feel alone, not just at the party, but in his job too. His spot on important company boards, his invites to fancy events, and all the power he worked so hard to build, it was all starting to slip away. "Maybe," Grayson said, his voice not strong like usual, "maybe we could slowly make some changes to how we hire people." "Slowly?" August replied sharply. "That's the problem, Grayson. We've been doing things slowly for years. Tonight showed us all the people we've been missing because of that." August took out his phone and looked at some messages. 3 big companies have already promised to help with Alara's new idea. Sienna's team is writing up plans right now. The world is moving forward, Grayson, with or without you. Just then, Nova Chen finished her last interview of the night. She had talked to Alara's old professor from Columbia University. The professor arrived late, but added important support to Alara's ideas. Grayson watched helplessly. The people he thought would always back him up were now helping Alara. His strong world was falling apart. Alara saw Grayson from across the room, but she didn't smile or feel happy about his pain. This night wasn't about revenge. It was about change, about opening doors that had been closed for a very long time. As the night came to an end, the difference between the beginning and now was huge. This party was supposed to show off power and keep certain people on top. But instead, it showed that things were changing. The mansion's big rooms, once filled with rich decorations and power, now felt old and out of touch. Then came the biggest surprise of the night. Nova Chen, who had been writing everything down in her notebook, stepped forward as the last guests were getting ready to leave. She placed her notebook on a table and walked to the center of the room. "Before everyone leaves," she said clearly, "there's one more story to tell." She looked at Alara. "Do you want to tell them, or should I?" Alara smiled, calm and strong. "Go ahead, sis." That one word, sis, was like a loud boom in the room. Grayson, who had been sitting by the stairs, looked up in shock. Everyone froze. Nova's serious face softened. "Yes," she said. "Alara is my sister. I was adopted by a rich family and given every chance, but Alara wanted something different. She wanted to understand the world from the ground up and make real change." Everyone in the room started thinking differently about the night. Alara's strong speech, her plans, her work with Sienna, it was all part of a big plan. "For 6 years," Nova continued, "I've been collecting stories about smart people stuck in low-paying jobs because of unfair rules. Ilara's work here, cleaning for Mr. Mills, became one of those stories. It shows how power keeps itself strong. Grayson stepped forward slowly, his face pale. You were spying on me? No, Grayson, Ilara said calmly. We were learning about a system. You were just a good example of what's wrong. Sienna walked up, standing beside Ilara and Nova. When Ilara told me about what she saw 2 years ago, Sienna said, I knew it was time to do something. Tonight wasn't to embarrass you, Grayson. It was to show how silly it is to judge people by their job or money. Nova opened her notebook again. Tomorrow's news won't just be about this party. It will be a whole story series about amazing people who never got their chance. Ilara's story, our story, is only the beginning. Everyone stood silently, now understanding what had really happened. This wasn't just about turning things around. It was the start of something big. Grayson sat down on the bottom step of his fancy staircase. He finally understood. He had tried to shame Ilara, but instead he showed the world his own unfairness. And it had been written down, studied, and would soon be shared in a famous newspaper. Ilara looked at him and said, You invited me tonight to remind me I didn't belong in your world. But what really happened is that the world saw how much it needs to change. The guests didn't leave with silly goodbyes or fake smiles. They left with big plans, phone numbers exchanged, and promises to help. The story wasn't ending, it was just starting. As Ilara, Nova, and Sienna walked out of the house, they stopped at the door and looked back. Grayson was still sitting there alone in his big house full of fancy art and broken ideas. The three women shared a quiet smile. They had come to make things better, and they had done something even bigger. They had started a movement. As they walked into the night, they knew the next day would bring new talks, new chances, and new hope for all the people who had waited too long to shine. The night was over, but its magic had only just begun. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos too. See you in the next one.